Hi, welcome back to the Parenting Connection. Today in Chapter 6, we're going to talk about the brain again, but we're going to talk about a little bit about how we function in relation to what has happened to us. If you remember, in our last chapter, we talked about how the brain is set up. We have the brainstem, which is at the base of your skull, and then we have the limbic system, which is deep within the brain and sort of comes around the brainstem. And then we talked about the neocortex, which is right up here in a lining that goes over the top of the skull. And what we learned is that the brainstem is wired for threat, and it helps us to survive when threatening things happen to us. The limbic system is wired for emotions and relationships, and it helps us learn to trust, to have empathy if things go well. It also helps us learn how to form relationships. If things don't go so well, it can be the source of mistrust or having trouble getting along with other people because they don't seem safe to us. And in the neocortex, we do higher thinking. We're able to solve problems, make decisions, do abstract reasoning, learning higher concepts. And if you remember, the brain develops from the base toward the front. So the last part, the higher thinking part of our brain, doesn't actually finish growing until we're between the ages of 26 and 30. So how does the brain function affect our ability to keep ourselves calm, to calm ourselves down when we get upset, to get along with other people, form relationships, and to do our highest possible functioning? That's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to use a device that looks like a ladder. And on the ladder, on the bottom rung, you have the brainstem. In the middle, again, is the limbic system. And at the top is your neocortex. And we're going to learn how, when people are dysregulated or they're under threat, how that impacts their ability to relate to other people and their ability to think clearly. We're also going to look at how, when people are calm and soothed and regulated, how that helps them to form relationships with other people and to really explore the possibilities of their intelligence. So there's a lot to cover today, and I hope you stay with us and learn more about this important part of human functioning. So we just had a little lesson on how the brain functions, and why that is important is because trauma affects both children and adults in ways that impact the way that they function, that people function and relate to each other. So this is really important. And so if you think of the brain that we just had drawn a picture of, and you turned it so that the front of your head was at the top and the base of your head was at the bottom. So this would be your brainstem here. Your limbic system would be deep within this part of the brain, and your neocortex would be up here. And so what I've done is I've drawn it as a ladder. So you go from your brainstem to your limbic system to your neocortex. Why is that important? Well, as we said earlier, your brain is hardwired for threat. So we're always ready to absorb negative or scary information. That's why television, news, advertisers, they use headlines and they use a tone of voice which tries to get people worried or afraid or excited because they're more likely to tune in and pay attention. So if you ever notice that, you'll see these headlines that are extremely sort of exaggerated, and then you hear the actual story and it's really nothing quite that serious. It's a technique that they're using because they know that the fear will sort of grab people's attention. So the fact that we're sort of wired that way makes us very vulnerable to becoming what's called dysregulated. And dysregulation means that you're preparing either for attacking running away, or shutting down. And the reason that you do that is that you're getting ready to defend yourself. And so if we perceive a threat, and so now, we don't live in the woods anymore, and so most of us have never gotten chased by a bear. But there's other threats in our society, and it might be things like going to school and getting a bad grade, or it might be something like having your parent yell at you because you've made a mistake, or it may have something to do with a parent maybe who's drinks a lot of alcohol and becomes very enraged and comes home and sort of intimidates the family. All these experiences are wired to have children and adults respond in a way that makes them extremely either angry or afraid or sad. You see your dog get run over by a car, you're overcome with grief. These are feelings that cause dysregulation. And so we become extremely, we feel very, very strongly, and it feels very negative to us. So when we're in a state of threat or dysregulation, our limbic system responds to that. And so we work from the bottom up. That first encounter or threat sets off our brainstem. And then our limbic system, either if we run away, we isolate ourselves. And you've probably experienced this. If someone has insulted you or scared you, you want to get out of there. You want to run away, and you want to sort of hide or put yourself away where no one can hurt you or bother you. Another response might be the fight, which is attack, or you might try to hit somebody or try to somehow hurt them as a way of defending yourself or as a way of revenging the hurt that you just felt. Another tendency that people have sometimes is to herd, to sort of try to disappear into a crowd or to flock with other people. That's another tendency humans have when they're under threat, and you'll see that sort of in groups or mobs. And then the final, or the dissociation, or the freeze, or the shutdown. Kids shut down. Sometimes if we feel like we're under attack and we can't get away, we just sort of we sort of zone out, and we try to remove ourselves mentally so that we don't have to experience the type of assault that's coming toward us. So that's possible reactions of your limbic system when you're feeling under threat. What happens in your cortex during those times? What happens to your higher thinking? One thing that happens is that your perceptions become less accurate. You can't perceive quite as precisely. So let's say that you were victimized, by some sort of a crime. Maybe it was dark out and someone grabbed your purse. And then you're put in front of a line of people who look very similarly to each other. It's going to be very difficult for you to accurately identify who that person was, unless you got a really good look at their face and for some reason that made like a visual imprint, because your senses are otherwise occupied when you're in a state of extreme fear. There's some sensory perception there, but it may not be enough to really clearly think about what you just experienced. I mean, if you have a group of different people and they were both all around the same trauma, you might get some very different stories, even though they were all in the same place at the same time. The other thing that gets interrupted is your cognitive processes. Your cognition or your thinking ability becomes distorted. So, for example, being paranoid is sort of an example of having your thinking process not be very clear or rational. A person was telling me recently that they watch a lot of horror movies and they watch a lot of true crime movies. And so this person has a lot of anxiety and they have trouble sleeping at night. And I asked them, like, how many times has someone broken into your house or tried to hurt you in your home during the night? And the answer was 0. Because it's not something that commonly happens to us. But if we start to perceive that that's a a real threat or that that's something that would commonly happen to us, our brain starts to prepare us for that. And so we become sort of hyper alert, and our brain doesn't want to calm down because that sense of alertness is what protects us. And so I want to talk, again, before we go to the other side of this ladder, I want to talk about something that's called hypervigilance. When a child lives in a household where there's either chronic or very unpredictable levels of attack and violence by an older person or a dangerous person, it's almost like being in a war zone where the child learns and their brain learns that to relax or to calm down will put them in danger. For example, if you're living around, dangerous animals, you always have to be alert and aware of where they're at so that you are not at risk. And so this is called hypervigilance, and what happens is the chemicals in your brain, the stress hormones, start to overfire, and the child unconsciously tries to keep themselves in a state of constant alert, which, if they're in a place that is in school or even if they're at home, it may look like they're running around and they're sort of bouncing off the walls and they can't calm themselves down. This is sort of a innate process that happens not because the child wants it to, but it's a physical reaction to trying to protect themselves from threat. So one of our parents, we always present this in class, and it generates a lot of discussion, and it also triggers a lot of memories in parents of things that have happened to them. And I remember one father saying, well, this explains a lot. Like, no wonder I didn't do very well in school. And as I talk about the other side of this ladder, I think you're going to understand what he meant. So if you looked over here at the dysregulation and how the limbic system and the cortex responded to that, if you look on the other side, we're going to talk about what it means to regulate. So we talked about that before. To be soothed, to calm down, to be relaxed. That is a state of regulation where all of your physical processes are sort of in a nice static place. When you're in a state of regulation, or you can regulate, then you're able to relate, because then you can sort of notice other people, you can maybe take some risks. It's hard to take risks when you don't take risks when you're in a state of threat. But when you're in a state of calm, you might reach out or try something new. So creating relationships and trust are really important to doing your higher learning and your higher processes. So typically throughout history, we've lived in communities and we've depended on each other in order to create housing, economic institutions, all the things that allow us to do well and to function and survive. So being regulated, creating relationship, all this sets the stage for reason. So all the higher thinking processes that we talked about, having insight, learning new things, being able to solve problems, being able to create, be imaginative, all these things come out of a place of feeling safe and connected so that you're free to do some of this other type of specialized activities. And what is really important to know here is that when we talked about the three parts of the brain, the part of the brain that stores the sensory memories is unable to communicate with the higher part of the conscious brain. What does that mean? It means that when something happens that triggers one of those sensory memories, it can throw a person into a state of dysregulation, anxiety, panic, fear, rage, very quickly, and those are called triggers. And when that happens, that person is unable to think straight. So for example, with Navy SEALs, they're muscle trained, meaning that they're put into situations where they practice so that their muscles learn what to do in certain situations, because even Navy SEALs don't have the ability in those circumstances to think rationally and to reason and to solve problems. So what we're looking at here is it's called a bottom-up process, meaning your brain goes from the base of your brain up to the top. What does that mean? It means that in order to function at your best, you need to feel calm and relaxed and secure. You need to feel connected to other people. So if you're bullied or you're always on the outside, it's hard for you to focus on things that are more that are higher level. Why? Because belonging to a group, for example, or having relationships is such an important part of survival. And so we're wired to sort of be able to get into safe places and to connect with each other so that we can do more interesting activities. And if you think about school, for example, school can be very dysregulating for a child who doesn't feel safe. I'm not going to go into the details of that now, but there's a lot of really interesting materials you can learn about that. So what happens when someone feels so dysregulated that they really can't calm themselves down, or they can't get into a place where you can even talk to them? One thing is, people need space to calm themselves down, but they also need soothing. So if it's your child, for example, and depending on their age, you have to determine, like, do they want to be held? Do they need some space? If you can hold them, you can soothe them through rocking them or singing to them. That's typically what you do with a crying baby. If it's an older child, you might create a presence where you come and you sit by them and you wait for them to calm down. And then sometimes you can help them with words. For example, like, you're really frustrated that, your brother keeps knocking your tower down. And so by using those words, or even by using your words yourself with about yourself, I was so angry because, I made dinner and then everybody left because something happened outside and the food got cold and no one ate it. By me being able to explain my feelings, it communicates to other people. And once I connect with other people, if they come back to me and say, for example, oh, well, how about if we just heat it up and pick up where we left off and we can still have dinner and it can be fine. That kind of give and take of sort of hearing each other, listening to each other's experiences and problem solving, that becomes the basis for having a healthy family life. Hey, Jim, what do you have there?
I have some tea.
Oh, what a great idea.
Yeah.
We were just talking about the brain and how people need to feel regulated in order to create relationship and have conversation, and then that's where they can process higher types of learning and higher types of thinking. So tea would be a great way to regulate yourself. So thank you.
You're welcome. Just a good way to sit down, take your time, slow down. I think that slowing down is a big part of it, right?
Yeah, and just sort of relaxing a little bit. Taking a few minutes to relax. Even if you are upset and you go somewhere by yourself and sit down for a little bit, that's a great way to sort of gather your thoughts and start to feel a little bit better. Yeah. And so, well, since you brought us this tea, how about if we talk...
What should we talk about?
Well, yeah, I was thinking we could talk a little bit about times in our lives when we felt extremely dysregulated or threatened, and how we might remember something that happened that might relate to like a sensory memory that we have, or something that triggers us. Because we know that sensory memories can become triggers. I remember a time many, many years ago when I was very young, and my mom was a piano teacher. And I was maybe 3, I don't know what I did, but my dad got angry at me, and he spanked me in front of one of the piano students' mothers. And I remember a feeling of humiliation. And as I got older and I learned about the brain, I remembered that every time I thought of that incident, I remembered the print on the dress of the mother. It was a dark green print with black squiggly lines, and I still have that sort of imposed on my brain, this fabric, and it was associated with this feeling of being humiliated. And I don't think I had ever realized before why I always remember this woman's fabric, but it's because that's what I was looking at, because I was short and I was looking at the bottom
Burned
of
into your memory.
her dress. Yeah, isn't that interesting how that could happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry about that.
Well, we all have memories like that, don't we?
Yeah, I can throw one in here. I hate pecan sandies.
Oh.
My
taste.
when I was 9 years old, I made the mistake one day of getting out the bag of pecan sandies, and I took 6 or 7, I guess it was 7, and put them on the kitchen table just as my 16-year-old sister came in. And she said, if you took them out of the bag, you're going to eat every last one.
How old were you again?
I was 9.
9. So maybe you didn't know how many you could handle.
No, and she was 16 and mean.
Mm-hmm.
So I ate 7 pecan sandies that day.
Wow.
The smell still bothers me.
Wow.
If I walk down the aisle in the grocery store where there's pecan sandies, I have to get out of that aisle.
You feel sick.
I'm not making, I hope I'm not ruining Keebler's sales here, but they'll never sell pecan sandies to me ever again. I'm sure they're doing fine without me. But absolutely, it just triggers right back to that moment.
Because she was bigger and she was sort of intimidating.
She was mean.
And she was mean and she made you eat those. So that flavor, that taste is associated with that horrible feeling of being forced to do something.
Exactly.
That was really,
she turned out to be a wonderful sister, by the way. But at that
Except
point,
for
I
that
didn't like
one
her.
incident.
I did not like her.
Yeah, but that was, exactly. Bullying by an older sibling can be something that causes, a terrible memory. Some kids are sexually abused within the family by someone, even a sibling. And so all of these feelings are extremely strong, that are a sense of disgust or...
And you can understand how, God forbid, sexual abuse could really traumatize you. But, aside from the event, whatever it was, how you feel about it, in a way, has a lot to do with how much you feel like it traumatizes you, right?
Right, in both of these situations, I was little, I had no control over my dad, and you were young, you had no control with your sister there. As kids, you usually don't have much control, and so whatever someone's doing to you, you just have to sort of endure it. So when Joe talked about the pecan sandies and how at the time that was just a really unpleasant experience for him, but later, whenever he would go to the grocery store and he would notice the pecan sandies in the grocery aisle, it would give him a terrible feeling, so much so that he would imagine the smell of it. When he would see the package, he would imagine the smell and the taste of it, and he wouldn't even want to be in that grocery aisle. And that's a great example of how our sensory memories, which aren't always conscious, but they impact the way that we function in the world. It's a very, very powerful negative association.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have my own experiences. And, before I even say that, I have relatives who have been to war, and of course, we would all acknowledge someone who's been to war, or people who deal with life and death situations. Of course, many of those things can be very traumatic, right? Mm-hmm. But, we all have our own things that we grapple with or that happen to us and that were really hard. Growing up, I played Little League Baseball, and it wasn't life or death, of course, but it was hard sometimes. My dad was a great baseball player. And I think my dad, he wanted me to do my best, and he had expectations, and I often felt like I just can't live up to them. So the smell of an old baseball glove, or
that leather.
Yeah, that can take me back to Little League. When the game got rained out, I was often happy because the pressure was off. I didn't have to, live up to anyone's expectations. Or, sometimes when you're practicing baseball, it's in the cold months. It's cold, spring, early spring, March. And sometimes when you would hit the ball, it would hit the wrong part of the bat, and the vibration really kind of hurt. They'd call it a stinger. And you could feel that, going up your arms. And don't forget, too, Little League Baseball uses a hard ball. And we even talk about, okay, we're ready to play hardball here. That says something about it can be a little bit dangerous. If that ball goes the wrong way, it could hit you. I know we had a pitcher on my team. The one game he was pitching, and we had actually a kid in our league who went on to like very nearly crack into the Major League Baseball, right? And he was good even in Little League. And he hit that ball so hard, it came straight back and hit our pitcher right in the chest.
Ooh.
And he collapsed immediately and just fell on the mound, and he was down for a while. And who knows, that could have been a serious situation, right?
Yeah.
And all these things, it's not nothing, right? Things like that happen. I've seen kids get hit in the head with a baseball. That could be a serious thing.
Sure.
You know, so all these things can be traumas on, you know, different levels.
Right. It's not just something that someone did to you. It can be something that just happened to you. It could even be an accident.
So it happens to someone else and you see it.
The way that people respond to that and the way that you respond to that, it's really important. If something bad happens to you and people soothe you and try to help you, that's a very different experience than if people laugh at you or try to make fun of you. That can be really devastating when you're already in a very vulnerable position. These are all things that's important to remember as parents, because we are the people that set the templates for relationships with our children. As we talk about children, there's a reading that we often do in class that really speaks to what the experience is of children and what's the difference between parents and children.
Yeah, it's called Speak to Us of Children by Khalil Gibran. And it goes like this. Your children are not your children. They are sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. For even as he loves the arrow which flies, so he loves also the bow which is stable.
So today we talked about how what our threat creates dysregulation, and when we're dysregulated, how that impacts our ability to interact with other people and to think. And so it's really important that we learned how to calm yourself down and how to calm your children down, because our ability to regulate ourselves, to soothe ourselves, is going to impact the way we communicate with our children, and that's going to impact their ability to regulate themselves. And the reason that's so important is when people become very dysregulated, it breaks trust in a relationship. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to create relationships that are secure and that help children to be resilient. And so we talked about that and how that can lead to us being able to make informed decisions, how to learn and self-reflect about ourselves, how to learn about child development and our children, and how to become parents that we want our children to learn from and to grow from. And so that's really why this whole piece is so important. Next time, we're going to talk about anger and power, and how power is very important in relationships. So anger often seems to go along with power, but when we're able to reflect and understand power better, we're able to get along better with our children and really with all the people in our lives. So we're really looking forward to talking about power and communication next time. See you next time.